So we got a couple of questions in from a couple of the people chiming in today, and I guess we'll just start off with that and just kind of build from there. So one of the first questions we have is, in everyone's experience, because I'm sure it all depends on the mental strength of the individual after a long diet to keep it off. But when the person has always been a higher body fat percentage person that successfully completes a diet and gets to the goal body comp, is it always going to be a challenge for that person to keep the newer body comp, or does the body adapt? So we'll let Mark start off and then we'll kind of go from there if that works for you guys.
Yeah, sure. I think maybe the underlying question there is like kind of like set point theory stuff. Has the individual moved past their set body weight so much that it's going to be tough for them to maintain, and there's some like metabolic adaptations, that type of stuff? I think in my experience, like if someone's they built enough successful and positive habits around what they need to do to maintain a calorie intake that's going to allow them to work back up to maintenance and maintain that, it's not a huge issue. It's not like they're really behind the 8 ball and it's going to be, like really, really tough to manage and maintain. So I think as long as the habits are there and someone's in the right mindset to be able to continue to adhere to the things that they did to get them there, albeit at slightly higher calories, so that they're not, continuously dieting or in a deficit. And, good coaching will always allow someone to do that, work back up to maintenance levels and maintain that. It shouldn't be that problematic. I think there's probably like there's this thought that, these individuals have already struggled with this. Dieting can be really, really tough and they're not gonna be able to maintain it. But at the same time, like if you have the right habits in place and you haven't been overly restrictive in food choices to get to that point, it shouldn't be all that tough to maintain as long as the habits are there. So from I think this is like a practical application standpoint, it's definitely doable. Science aside though, that might be a different situation, but I haven't seen a practical experience it'd be that tough to maintain. What do you guys think?
Caylea, you want to go?
Oh, I was going to say they're probably looking at like a lot of people who have hard rebounds. They can't maintain the habits. They rebound, all, if not more, the body weight. So I guess a better question, you could like frame it like how can you go about ensuring that there isn't a rebound following a cut or a deficit?
Yeah, definitely. We can cover that after this. Paul, what do you have?
So the first piece there, like I totally agree with Mark. Like it's as long as you have good habits and structure in place, then reverse dieting from that position of that ideal body comp is typically going to be tolerated well. I think the barrier with this question is that this is like a one-time thing, when we have to remember that if we're training for performance or even aesthetic goals, this is typically a cyclical pattern, right? We diet down, we achieve our goal body composition, we stay at maintenance. If our goal is to continue to improve ourselves, we should be eventually heading into a slight surplus, trying to put on a little bit of tissue, and then coming back down to maintenance, and then proceeding into a diet phase again. What I've seen in practical application is those people who have the habits and structure in place go through that cycle at a much easier pace. The ability to get leaner and to achieve a lower body fat percentage tends to improve. So every time you diet, you tend to get leaner, and every time you get into your, we'll call it a weight gain phase, you tend to maintain your body composition a little bit better as things progress. Speaking from personal experience, it is the reverse dieting process is more challenging. So if you're coming from a position of, let's say, higher regular body fat percentage, and you've come down, you've hit your goal, the hunger issues, the cravings, things of that nature will be a little bit more severe. But the more time you spend at that given body composition, it tends to be the easier you're able to maintain it. And that's really kind of what the research boils down to, as well as like the longer you stay at that point, the more likely you are to have an easier time maintaining it. I think there's the challenge with doing research on such a topic would be adherence long term, right? To be able to adhere to something for a long enough period of time for us to see significant improvements would be tough. And that's why I think, as Mark mentioned, leaning on anecdotal experience or practical application within this aspect is definitely more beneficial too.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think you're bang on with the periodization of like different goals and strategies and stuff. And I think at the same time too, we got to think about it from a coaching perspective of just, you know, delivering expectations and what this process would look like, be it, you know, you get down to a goal weight, maybe you're training for a specific event, maybe it's like a weight class athlete, something like that. This might not be something that we can maintain forever, but here's what it would look like. And here's what, you know, expectations around your food levels would be it working back up to maintenance levels and reverse dieting. And you're completely right around, I think in theory, everyone likes the idea of reverse dieting and the process, but in execution, it's very, very tough to do. You're thinking of like training for a big event. It's easy to train when you have that event on the calendar and in your mind, but the reverse dieting and working out of it is just very tough to execute because be it, you don't have to be on stage or, you know, on the platform or any of those things coming up. Like you don't have that big monumental thing right in front of you. So it's tougher to execute, not impossible. It's just tougher to execute. And I think that's probably where we just have different expectations too, as we're working out of that.
Yeah, definitely a great point there, Mark and Paul. One of the things I look at when it comes to this type of question is if you do have someone who is predominantly overweight their entire life and has never had abs, the idea that they're going to diet down and it's going to be an easier task or as easy of a task as someone who's already naturally lean, understanding that the adipocytes, they either grow or they shrink. You don't necessarily ever get rid of them. That person's always going to have a struggle with staying as lean as possible. So I think of it in terms of performance. If this person's a performance athlete, does that level of leanness interfere with their ability to perform at a high level? If it does, then that's going to be more impactful than if they had a little bit of extra body fat and they felt better and they were able to perform at a high level. I know the people who are overweight and have more body fat their entire life, to get down to a lean disposition is going to create a lot of suffering. Their performance is going to go in the tank and their hormones are going to go in the tank as well. So those are the things that I would look at in terms of whether or not it's an ideal situation for that person to stay at that body fat percentage. If their hormones are out of whack and their performance is suffering, then what would be the point, right? And also understanding that when you have those type of people and they're rebounding out of that phase, they have to be a lot stricter with their ability to grow, right? That means the calorie jumps are going to be a lot smaller, and they're also going to have to do more dieting on a consistent basis. I don't necessarily think that the set point theory necessarily reigns true in a sense that their body fat is, you know, their adipocytes will just disappear and they're just going to maintain that level of leanness. It's always going to be there. And if they have more than the average person based on the way they were raised and in utero and things like that, that's always going to be an uphill battle for them. And it's just a matter of whether or not they're willing to take the years and the years of the discipline to see their performance downgrade and then build that back up, and then see their hormones downgrade and then see what they can do to fix that in order for them to maintain that level of leanness. So it's more or less, is that an ideal situation for that person would be the main thing that I would think of, not whether or not it's even capable or doable, but what's the point of it?
Mm-hmm.
I think that lends itself to our communication to our clients, and as coaches, having an understanding of maybe the barriers or limitations that are facing them within that process, and saying, listen, this is what you're facing. Okay. We are going to have to be very strict. We are going to have to modify your calories very slowly. And I need your adherence to be close to, if not 100%, if you want to maintain this physique long-term. Is this your goal, or is your goal performance? Because if your goal is performance and recovery, we do need to feed you more, and the body composition may need to shift in order for that to take place. Ultimately, it's their choice. Right? It's their choice for them to make. And if their body composition is more important than their performance, then that's a trade-off that they're willing to make on their part. as long as they're aware of the expectations put forth.
Totally. Yeah, no, I think I always like to take a kind of a harm reduction standpoint on this, because when someone's asking you about something and trying to go in this direction, like we, as coaches, we build trust and rapport to give them the best possible advice in that scenario, but pushing them too far out of what they want to do probably is just going to put them in a position where they're going to end up doing what they want to do regardless of you. So, to say like, here's the best way we would approach this, and here are your options, let's lay them out for you. And then going down that path and being like, you know, I'd like to support you in either way, but I just know in my experience, when I'm like, no, this makes absolutely zero sense for you, you shouldn't be doing it, they're going to be like, well, I'm going to do it myself anyway. And then you've lost the opportunity to help someone in the best possible way, given the evidence and like solid coaching support. So it's just kind of weighing those things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. So to kind of go into the idea of how you should get someone out of that, Caylea, you brought that up first. So we'll kind of let you go over that and bring that question to fruition, is the idea of what's the best strategy to get someone out of, let's say, an extreme deficit, right? Because a small deficit, like a mini cut or anything like that, 8-week diet, 10-week diet, there's really not that big of a strategy. You just kind of put them back to maintenance calories, so to speak. But when it comes to like a long diet where they've reached new levels of leanness, and their hormones are kind of out of whack, and you have all these other physiological things going on, what have you found to be the best approach with that, Caylea?
Probably the slow and steady approach. And I also look at it from a holistic standpoint, like why has this person been on such low calories for a long period of time? What other habits do they have? What habits do they not have? And what we have to build on, because as you guys are kind of talking, we're looking at this from the biological, physiological side of it, but it is so heavy in the psychological standpoint, and getting the person to actually just adhere to the diet and make it as easy for them as possible. Right. So you might have this like pretty like spreadsheet of how their weight's going to fluctuate and the cycles you're going to have them in. But if they don't stick to it, it's not working. Right. Even though it would work if they would stick to it. So someone on an extreme who has been dieting for a long time, very low calories, I would bring them up slowly week by week and see how they feel, see how they think about themselves. You can get a little worry when people start seeing the scale move. So a lot of times I'll take the scale away because that number freaks them out because their body weight is ultimately going to go up. We have no choice to, right? But it'll sort of level out. And then once we've been brought them back up to maintenance for a sustainable period of time, then we can go back down and do it the proper way. So that's typically how I handle that.
Yeah, Paul, how do you handle it, or to go off of what Caylea said?
So I've done it both ways. So I've done it with like a very slow, methodical approach. I tend to leave the scale in because I don't necessarily, like if someone's worked that hard to get that low, you don't want them to deviate too much from where they are, because that's where they want to be, right? But educating them on the fact that their weight will come up. So just full communication, the whole point. So, Brooke mentioned in the comments that there's a trade-off that can take place where, the slow and steady approach tends to be the most ideal to maintain body composition. But in terms of adherence, raising calories faster and getting back up to maintenance faster tends to help with adherence. I will present both options to clients and I'll educate them on the benefits to both. So if we're in a situation where this individual is really struggling with adherence, maybe it's best to jump up a little bit faster. If they have good habits and structure and they're more diligent, then maybe a slow and steady approach will suit them. The way that I bring people down relies heavily on NEAT. So in an ideal scenario, I can keep NEAT high where it was at the end of the diet and start to raise calories. Then once the hunger has dissipated, I'll start to decrease NEAT as well. So the more variables that you've been playing with during the dieting process, the more tools you have in your toolbox to get them back up to that kind of baseline level of energy expenditure. The reality is the way they feel is going to drive this process a little bit more. Tony, you mentioned that, like the way they feel, the way they're performing. So keeping in mind, most of us are dealing with performance athletes, strength athletes. It's important to realize like the sooner we can get them back up to their baseline level of performance, the better they're going to be, and letting that be the driver of the process. The other way you could do it is kind of a happy medium between the two of them, where you slowly raise the baseline level of calories, but maybe you give them, instead of having their quote unquote fun meals meeting their macros, you allow them meals off to enjoy with family, as long as you can rein those in a little bit and they don't become binge sessions. There's a lot of different ways to accomplish that goal. Okay, sorry, I was reading the comments.
Mark, what do you have?
Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing, and I agree with Caylea and Paul here, like there's so much psychology that goes into this. I think we kind of established some rough timelines of what things would look like, and have a rough plan in terms of how we're adding food back in, be it slow or steady, but we're listening to our athletes, we're listening to our clients, how they feel. And I think a lot of times one of the biggest indicators of where we should go is when, their behavior, their goals don't really line up with their behavior and motivations, right? So it's like, I want to do this slow and steady. I want to add food back in. I want to take time, slowly gaining weight back. And then you see them like, going off the plan, or there's days untracked, or there's just, you're listening and seeing like, hey, I get that you want to go about this way, slow and steady, but what I'm seeing is that you're having a really tough time sticking to it. Let's speed things up a little bit, and adherence should be able to, you'll probably be able to stick to it a little bit better.
Guys, make sure that you're muted. If you're not the speaker, please make sure you're muted. Thank you.
So that would be my, I think there's in terms of, we have a rough plan and we're using the scientific principles to guide this process, but at the same time, we got to listen to where our clients are at and how they're performing, as well as, what they're doing well and what they're struggling with, to kind of guide that process. Because at the end of the day, they're driving the ship. So we got to just kind of find a happy balance with that in terms of how much we're adding in and what we're adding in from that standpoint. But I think the biggest thing is that there's so much psychology as opposed to hard science on this stuff.
Yeah, I think the psychology aspect is important, and understanding that if you've gone through a diet, you can definitely relate better to your client athlete, which I think is an invaluable tool. It's like if you're coaching someone, or if you have your niche in one of these demographics, you should be living that lifestyle as well. You should be going through those struggles so you can relate. So knowing that how that person's going to feel after diet, you're able to communicate that. So I know when I have people that are getting on stage or very, very lean, a month to 6 weeks before we start transitioning out of that diet, I start talking to them about the post-competition period so that they know what to expect, that they're going to fully understand that after the show is going to be way harder to keep the hunger down, to adhere to the plan, than it is going into the show. They're going to feel probably worse increase in calories for the first 4 to 6 weeks than they're going to feel going into that show. So as long as you're able to showcase that to them and communicate that to them on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis, that can definitely help them with that psychological approach. And then there's two ways of thinking about it. I like to think of it in terms of, if you have someone who's on PEDs, that can be a completely different rebound than if you have someone who's natural, right? If you have someone who's on PEDs, the hormones aren't that big of a deal to worry about, right? If you're a female, I think, well, we need to get your cycle back as soon as possible. So we're going to implement a diet that allows us to get your cycle back as soon as possible. That may mean increasing calories at a faster rate and putting on more body fat, as long as they're able to maintain a hormonal balance and a healthy balance and get their cycle back. That's going to allow them to start putting on muscle as much as possible. The idea of a slow increase means that they're spending more time sacrificing their ability to put on muscle. They may be in such a deficit that even a slow increase will keep them in a deficit, which may increase their risk of injury in the gym post-contest. They may increase their risk of losing more muscle post-contest. And the point of the show is not how lean can we get, but how much muscle can we start to put on, if that's their goal as physique competitors. If it's someone who's just a lifestyle client and would like to maintain a somewhat lean body, then that's going to be a completely different thing. Maybe that slow and steady route is good, but I always think about hormones and being able to get people's hormones back on track. So if they're a natural athlete, that increase is going to be a little bit higher and a little bit faster, so that we know as you diet down, your thyroid starts to go down, your testosterone starts to go down. So we want to make sure that we're bringing those calories back up to start improving those markers. And then once those markers are improved, then we can start maybe taking off, thinking about a recomp period, or not pushing calories as hard right? So it may be something that's a little bit more aggressive in the beginning to help with adherence, to help with hormones, to get women back on cycle. But if you're working with athletes that are PED athletes, hormones aren't that big of a deal, right? If you structure things in a way to where they can continue to push PEDs after the contest, then you can also go at it as if they need a lot of muscle, you can improve things and increase things really fast because the PEDs are going to help keep some of the fat off. But if they're already at a really good set point and they're at a high level competitive and they don't need to get fat, then you can keep them in that lower calorie place because the hormones aren't going to be out of whack because they're taking hormones to replace that. So those are kind of the ideas and the concepts that I think of. There's a lot of variables that go into it, but the psychology thing is going to be important for everyone. I don't care how many PEDs you're on, that's not going to help with your ability to adhere to a diet, but understanding physiologically and hormonally what's going on in the body will allow you to best facilitate their next steps. So blood work post-contest can help with that. And also just being with a client for a long time and understanding how they rebound. But women, it's very easy, right? Once their cycle's back on track, typically that means their hormones are back regulated. For men, it's going to be a libido thing. It's going to be an energy and a mood thing. Once that starts to get better, then that tells you that their hormones are pretty well regulated. Then you can start slowing down that process.
I'd love to hear, like, so we talked a lot about different indicators, both objective, and then we all talked about the psychology. So personally, I track their macros, their daily body weight, hours of sleep, perceived stress, perceived training quality, resting heart rate for some of my more adherent clients, and their steps. And through that, along with subjective reports, that's how we kind of dial in and make our decisions. I would love to hear how you guys separate the physiology from the psychology when speaking with your clients, because I think each one of us will do that a little bit differently. And I think it bears mentioning, like, the different ways we can do that, because a lot of the time, as we've all alluded to, how you feel may not be immediately indicative of your actual physiological situation. Right. So how do you educate the client on what's happening with their body, why they're feeling the way they're feeling, and then show them the evidence within those markers?
Go ahead, Caylea.
Oh, I think just as you said, you're looking at these different, perceived perceptions of how they're feeling, apart from measuring, sleep quality, their macros, perceived stress, things like that. So I think for me, the best way to do it is just to be with them a long enough time, because sometimes you can get someone right off the bat. They're like, oh, I feel great. Like these are they're just going in, but they're not really feeling that great. They're just really motivated to get started. Right. And then as you go on, like, you can sort of see patterns in their behavior, and then you can ask more detailed questions based on what you've gotten to know about that person.
Yeah. What about you, Mark?
Yeah, I'm recalling and trying to unpack the strategy. And I think a lot of the times, I think we're under the assumption that we've worked with this individual for long enough to have guided them through the process of dieting down, ideally, right? Like, that's going to give us the most information, where they're at, and how they kind of handle these things. And then in, like, kind of the, I don't know, we'll call it the post-show period, be it we're taking away some control and adding in some more food, like all of those things, it's just tough to navigate. So I think the biggest thing being, I'm trying to unpack it. I think we're listening in terms of what's going on with them. And a lot of times when they want to approach something in a certain way, be it like quote unquote a perfect reverse diet, and we're just not seeing their actions line up with that, which is pretty common. We're going to do some things to increase adherence, be it add in more food, go about this quicker. And it's not so much damage control. It's just that if they're going to deviate from the plan, regardless, as a coach, we're going to put things in place to make it more within their control. And I think one of the biggest things being, I see in the chat, I think it's Brooks talking about some of those like untracked meals, or I like to call them flex meals, like one of those things where we're trying to take away some elements of control, because once you've had so much control over a period of time, you kind of rely on that. And then you're in a different food environment now, post-show, you don't have this thing staring you right in the face where you have to adhere. It's tough to navigate. So adding in some of those strategies are really, really helpful. One of the best ones I found is something I consider the flex meals. So instead of going in the kind of good or bad food cheat meal path, it's more or less, let's track up to like 60% of our calories until 3 or 4 p.m., aiming for like higher protein, a little bit less of the other macronutrients that we would typically eat at that point. And then take, the night off to eat like a normal person with some more mindful eating parameters, be it, eat until you're 80% full, eat until you're hungry, don't be overly restrictive, but giving them that sort of strategies and put those in place, as opposed to being like, just take the night off and eat whatever you want, is like just really, really helpful for starting to pull out some of the control while still keeping people on track. It would be one of the biggest things. So starting to incorporate some of that stuff as we phase out and kind of reestablish some, I don't know, more like less intensive guidelines.
Yeah.
Brooke calls it structured flexibility. Perfect. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Great points. One of the things to think about too is how you're approaching getting ready for a contest, right? If you find that there is quality and better adherence through that flex meal, if you can keep that in your prep, right? So that it's not a new habit that they have to bring in, and they have that availability throughout the entire prep, or at least through most of it, then it's not going to be something that all of a sudden they get and it feels like more of a treat than it is just part of their structured habit that you've already built in through their plan as they're getting leaner. That may come with a little bit more restrictions as they want to get leaner and leaner, but the idea of having flexibility within their programming for food going into the show won't necessarily be as much of a kind of treat after the show, is one of the things that I would start to consider when putting in their diet, right? If you find that to be a viable thing. I like to approach it with a lot of statistics, right? Like the more stats I can have, the better. So I track their HRV, I track their blood pressure, I track their blood glucose, I track their sleep quality. So if they have an Oura ring or a Whoop, that can help me with all this stuff. And then I get their blood work done on a consistent basis. So all their markers that I'm getting on a day-to-day basis, I can use that as power for me to be like, hey, this is what your body's telling you. Even if you feel great, your HRV is still in the tank. When we started this prep, it was at 100. Now it's at 15. Let's get it up to 50 before we start adding in supersets and drop sets and stuff like that in their training. Or, your sleep's going to shit because you have too big of a meal before you go to bed. And then if your sleep's bad, then, ghrelin goes up in the morning and you have a hard time adhering to the plan, right? So it's about just reminding them of the physiological things and the biochemical things that happen within the body that would mess up their ability to adhere to the plan as much as possible. So as long as you have a lot of statistics and you're able to break those down in a way that kind of fits in their narrative, and you can explain it to them so that they're on board and their buy-in's high and they have like a why for what they're doing, that can increase adherence as well. So I look at those things in order for me to better approach the psychological side of things, right? Because if you're dealing with people who have gone on stage or who compete in powerlifting, who are actually competitive, they're going to be that type A personality of like optimization. So if you have all these statistics, then you can optimize it and you can use that to build adherence and habits. If it's a general population person, that conversation is going to be a little bit different. Statistics are great and all those markers are great for them, but a lot of it just comes down to fitting it in their lifestyle. So then it's about communicating their ability to bring everything in that they want to do into their lifestyle while maintaining their goals. And another thing to think about too is, communication is the key post-show. And I know a lot of coaches, they'll get their athletes to the show and they'll be like, okay, see you later. I did my part. I have my testimonial. I can post about you and get a bunch of new clients, but I don't need you anymore, right? So me, when working with them, knowing that that's going to be the hardest time, I may move their check-ins from 3 times a week to every day, just to see how they're doing mentally and see how they're doing, and maybe schedule a Skype call or a Zoom call so that I can connect with them on a personal basis through the online realm, so that I can see like, hey, they may be typing, everything's going good, but then when you get on the call, you look at them and you can just tell like it's not going good at all, right? And then you adjust from there. So that's kind of the way that I would look at the psychological side of it.
Cool.
So we did have a question, unless anybody wants to further extrapolate that, we did have a performance-based question. We good to go to that?
Yeah, let's jump into that one.
Cool, awesome. What might your nutritional approach look like for someone peaking into a powerlifting competition, for someone managing at weight or just above their weight class? So we have someone who's getting ready for, and Casey, if I misunderstand the question, just let me know. But if we have someone who's getting ready for a competition and they're either at weight or slightly above weight, how do you handle their nutritional approach for peaking? Is that right, Casey? Perfect. Okay. So we'll let you start, Paul.
So this is going to depend if it's a 2-hour weigh-in or a 24. So typically I want to make sure that the calories are going to be as high as they're going to be at the peak. So if we were doing any type of weight manipulation, it happened before prep. And if possible, we try to increase calories as we head into the peak. Well, from a, we'll call it, a biophysiological standpoint, no, your training is not going to be as energy intensive, but you need those calories to recover, especially from the central nervous system stimulus of the heavy training. And you don't want to be in a deficit when you're heading towards a meet. The fact that you are at weight or just slightly above, it depends what you mean by slightly above. If we're talking like 2% body weight, I wouldn't change a thing. If we're talking, 5% body weight, I would maintain a little bit of a stricter control over your intake. If we are at body weight, I may even try to increase calories. It'll all depend on that person and essentially where they are within their training process. I know for myself, when I'm going to a meet or with my more higher level clients, we try to increase calories. 5% over body weight tends to be my stopping point for whether I add calories or not. 3 to 5%. If it's a 24-hour weigh-in, that's more the key. Under 2% for a 2-hour weigh-in, because you don't want to have to be in a steep water cut situation if you only have 2 hours to put your weight back on. But the fact of the matter is, if the person is peaking, it shouldn't be a question of decreasing calories ever in an ideal scenario.
Yeah, what do you have, Mark?
Yeah, this is a really, really good question. I think the biggest thing in my experience, I deal with almost exclusively 2-hour weigh-in athletes. So I'm going to frame it around that. But if the athlete is just above the weight class, be it 1%, we're trying to keep calories as high as possible while maintaining that above 1%. Like if they're just slightly above the weight class. So if I've interpreted that question correctly. So we're trying to keep as food as possible without going too far over, so that as the show approaches, that week of, in terms of short-term manipulation stuff, we don't have to do all that much. We're only playing around with variables that are going to have very, very minimal impact on their performance, be it slightly reducing fiber and vegetable intake for lower residue, and they can just coast into the actual competition would be the biggest thing, right? But past that, the heavier an athlete gets outside of the weight class and above, be it 3%, 5%, in 2-hour weight class, weigh-in athletes, going any higher than that is just going to be counterproductive. They're going to have to do so much to get down to it, everything in the kitchen sink, that it almost takes the fun out of competing. I've had some athletes like Connor Lutz, for example, can come down from 6%. But past that, it's just really, really tough to navigate. And he's got the mindset of a competitor that's going to do whatever it takes to get there. So outside of that, the further we go up, it just becomes counterproductive. But if someone's actually 1% above, we're trying to keep their calories as high as possible while just maintaining that body weight, say a body weight average above the weight class. So we don't have to do all that much to get into it. And then we're still benefiting from some of the advantages of being a bigger athlete, body composition wise, in relation to all the other athletes in that weight class. So we're really, prioritizing what we need to within the weight class to perform well. But that would be one of the biggest things.
I love that you use Connor as an example. The guy weighs 106 pounds and just benched 440.
Yeah, no, he's
He's a freak.
Well, okay. And let me also preface this by saying, if anyone goes, checks out Connor's stuff right now, which is he just put up all-time numbers. Yeah. I haven't worked with him since 2018, but he'd be example of someone that, right. So I'm not taking.
Be a fringe example.
Yeah. But he'd be an example of someone that can come down from 6% above the weight class in a 2-hour weight class sport and still perform really well, manipulating some of those variables, where other people they're not going to be able to do that to the same extent. And that has a lot to do with that that Rocky hood up type mentality that I'm just going to take care of business.
What do you got, Caylea?
I agree with you guys. I honestly think that that should be a discussion too with the athlete. I get a lot of guys who are like, oh, I want to cut down for this weight class. And I'm like, okay, where are you at? Like, I'm about 20 pounds over. I'm like, okay, next meet. Like, not happening this time. Trust me. There's plenty of meets, plenty of competition. So that's really important to have with your athlete, especially if you're trying to control all these variables and just make them feel as best as possible. It's really important to not have them cut like a bunch of unnecessary body weight for the competition. Cause like you said, Mark, it does take the fun out of it. And then they're just going to have a crappy day. So,
yeah, I've started associating 2-hour weight class, like as like a taste of sour Skittles in my mouth, as opposed to lifting weights. And like, no one wants that. Like, that's typically against what the intention of the sport is. But at the same time too, like we're just thinking about like where they're coming from and what they want to accomplish. I think a lot of times if this is a lot of coaches are against I'm not going to cut for my first meet. But again, going back to that harm reduction standpoint, if someone's asking you to do this and take this journey on you, and you can guide them in the right direction as we go down that path, it's probably best that you help guide them on a 1 to 3% weight cut if they're really gung-ho on doing it, than saying, screw you, I'm going to go about this myself. Right. I've seen that so many times where, the coach is like, nah, like if you can't talk them out of it within the first 5 to 10 minutes, they're doing it with or without you. So sometimes if we can establish some trust and rapport and saying like, yeah, maybe we go about it this way, your way, I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. But past that point, they'll learn their lessons that way. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely great points. Just to give a little bit more context to it, typically around 8 weeks out is where I like to have people at their body weight that they're going to compete at. So that's kind of the plan as far as getting someone to their desired weight classes. Right around 8 weeks out, you're going to see a significant drop in volume and an increase in intensity. So there's really no need to continue that diet down process, because it just doesn't make any sense. You want their leverages to be where they're going to be, their body weight to be where it's going to be for when you're starting to do the technical work of singles and trying to get as proficient as possible with that. So you don't want any change. So I don't necessarily, when Paul says you want calories to be high to help improve recovery, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that the volume's so low and the central nervous system doesn't really get fatigued with such low volume that's too big of a concern. But I do want to think about it in terms of volume is going to be so low that you're not creating a novel stimulus to add muscle or keep muscle. So you don't want to start losing muscle. So you need those calories to be as high as possible to make sure you maintain as much muscle as you can with such low volume. And you just want to maintain that weight. So you want your calories at that point to maintain that weight and body composition, so that you're able to have the same leverages throughout the entire last 6 to 8 weeks of your prep. It's a struggle, right? Because you're gonna lose muscle going into a powerlifting competition because the volume is so low. So my idea is, how can we minimize that as much as possible? And that's why the calories stay so high. Because if you look at it from a bioenergetic standpoint, you don't need that many calories. It's ridiculous how low your volume's going, right? You're doing singles and doubles. You don't need a bunch of food to replenish your glycogen stores that you're not even depleted, not even close to depleted. So that's the way that I look at it. And then in terms of like what they all said about the weight and where you want to be at, that the research will kind of lend itself to showing right around that 3 to 5% is exactly where you don't have decremental performance outcomes. Anything above that, even if you do make it, you're going to see a decrease in your ability to perform compared to where your training was at. So that's always something to consider, where you're at, what you're trying to shoot for goal wise. And then just making sure, like Mark said, you have that mentality of it, because we've all met those people who go on a diet and the first week they're on a diet, they're like, I've already gotten weaker. It's like, no, there's no way we actually kept your calories the exact same, but now the fact that the diet's in there, you feel like you've gotten weaker. So mentally it's a thing to think about too with weight cuts.
I think thinking about how you're going to put the weight back on also matters too. Like this example is someone who is, relatively close to the weight class. So that wouldn't necessarily be a consideration. But if you are going to take off a significant amount of body weight, say in that, 5 to 7% range, you're going to want to have a plan for how to put it back on before you even take it off, because there's no point doing it if you can't put it back on and in the right places.
Yeah, be it like emphasizing liquids and carbs and salt post weigh in to the point where you can manage it, not feel like upset at your stomach. I know a lot of times people are like, now they buy into this recomp strategy, and they go so far in the other direction that, you know, they're about to start squat warm-ups and they're like, oh, this doesn't feel great. And it's like, yeah, no kidding. Because you probably pushed it too far in the other direction, right? So it's like having a plan in place, at least a pretty well-established rough plan, and then following it.
Yeah, so kind of just to expand on that, since there's no other questions, is the idea of what do you do after someone makes weight? What's your recomp strategy that you like to adhere to? What are some of the principles? Because it's going to dictate depending on how much that person cut, but what are some of the principles that you like to adhere to when it comes to that refeed process? We'll let you start, Mark.
Yeah, okay. Well, one thought that comes back to me, and it's kind of funny. I ran our CPU Westerns in 2019. It was a pretty big meet. And I remember I was just in meet director mode, so I wasn't paying too much attention. But I remember walking through the warm-up room after one of the weigh-ins and seeing some young dude eat a charcuterie board and thinking, where did I go wrong in all of this as like maybe an established thought leader? And I have no idea, you know, what his like normal food background was, be it like, I don't know, keto or whatever. Maybe he's just eating the food he normally does. But I saw it and thought like, man, that is not what we need to be doing. So more or less, putting a higher prioritization on carbohydrates, because that's what we're going to need to perform within the next 3 to 4 hours, and slightly less on protein. So in a lot of cases, if, you know, someone's macronutrient ratio, which I don't normally like to think about in that way, but if it's normally like 3 to 2 carbs, something like that, we're just putting an emphasis on 4 to 1, 5 to 1, making a larger emphasis on carbohydrates, as well as in the first 15 minutes after weighing in, we're just going to put the emphasis on getting fluid back in, with the priority on electrolytes as well. And I think a lot of times, like our kidneys we can only process around, like, depending on how dehydrated you are, like around a liter of fluid an hour. So, you know, weighing in right away and then trying to put 3 liters of water back in your body might be counterproductive too, right? So just being slow and steady with a little bit more liquid right after we weigh in, and then going back to solid foods with a priority on carbohydrates. The foods that we typically would eat, again, powerlifters are so notorious for, especially, I don't know, even in the kind of our evidence-based age, people are tracking their macros, they're making, you know, nutrient-dense choices and stuff. And then before you know it, they weigh in for a powerlifting meet after dieting for 12 weeks and then go to Denny's and eat like pancakes and bacon. It's like, God, what are you doing? Right? So just the normal carb choices we would typically have, just in a lot larger amounts, and coast in from there.
Awesome. Caylea, what do you have?
That doesn't deviate too far from what I have people do. I just caution them to not go and slam, like you said, Denny's right afterwards, because they're going to feel awful and sluggish, and it could affect them the next day. Honestly, I don't have too many chances to handle anybody that does 2-hour weigh-ins. So Mark, maybe if you can like give an idea of what that might look like, how someone might be feeling afterwards if they do cut like 3% body fat or body weight.
Yeah, I mean, and again, everything's always on a sliding scale, right? It's not that like someone cuts 5% is going to feel like absolute garbage. There's going to be some inter-individual variation, and people are going to handle things differently. Like I told you, one of the outliers that like is just dialed in and does it, where others are, you know, 3%, they feel pretty good. So I would never caution someone. It's like, it's not one of those things that we're not going to try out just because of it, right? 8 weeks out, we're not going to try a water coat just to see how you feel. But as you become a more established competitor and feeling, you know, going through this process and what it feels like, you have a better understanding of how you feel, how you react, and how you perform. And one of the biggest things in a 2-hour weight class or weight cut is, you know, is that trade-off of potential drop in performance worth it versus my competition? Right? In some scenarios, it might be, like, be it my training numbers suffer a little bit, but is that put me in a position to be much more competitive than it would be versus the other athletes in my weight class? So these are the type of decisions that we're making, as well as one thing that I was kind of talking about before with depending on where you're on the weight class, when you weigh in is going to have a big impact on this actual process. So we start to play in, is this a 6 a.m. weigh in? Is it a 12 p.m.? Is it afternoon? Like that's going to play into our established plan. And hopefully we know that long enough out in advance that we start to plan these things, because the decisions we make around a 6 a.m. weigh in are going to be much different than a 12 p.m. just because we have damage control. I can't tell you how many times I woke up with athletes at 4 a.m. and we're like, man, we got a motor here because we got, 600 grams to get off. So you got to start sweating right now. We have no room for that. Whereas if they woke up 400 grams over at a 12 p.m. weigh-in, we have tons of time to just coast in, right? So keeping all that kind of stuff in consideration. But let's say we got there, everything is happened as it should. We're looking at like electrolyte-based solution, typically Pedialyte, like half sweet kind of thing, half sweet in terms of the electrolyte content. Drinking that around most 1 to 2 liters right away. And then once we have that in our system, like 15 minutes later, once you're feeling a little bit better, we start to eat carbohydrates, be it almost as much as you can tolerate in your normal choices. People in the morning, it's like oatmeal and honey and some berries and stuff, and not going too far. If you like to eat like rice and soy sauce, like trying to keep the sodium level on the higher end of things, starting to like establish those, keep those choices around and starting to eat as much as those that you could tolerate. And how much most people know in terms of like, they're like, if this was a refeed meal or a flex meal, it looks like that, and playing around with those type of things. So typically like we're aiming for at least like 100 grams of carbs for most competitors within that first meal, and then trace protein as well.
Nice. Paul, what do you have?
So the 2-hour weigh-in does present a different dynamic than a 24. It's typically for someone who's trying to recomp. For a 24-hour weigh-in, I'll put together a macro list for them. I advise them that they're supposed to be eating according to their normal food choices. I'll give them some examples of meals that could make that up. Depending on how much they've dropped, I will prescribe a carbohydrate and electrolyte drink, along with some creatine and some glycerin as well, depending on how much weight they've lost. So that will be sipped throughout the day. And then the rest will be typically, if they haven't dropped a ton of weight, I won't give a restriction on when they can start eating. But if they have dropped a ton of weight, I'll make sure that they prioritize that liquid right away. And I typically won't have them eat their first meal for about 90 minutes, just so they can get some liquid in. And then from there, it'll typically be a quote unquote like high carb day. So protein will be a little bit down, fats will be down, and we're prioritizing carbohydrates and sodium. And then on meat day, what I like to do is my secret is baby rice cereal, because it's super easy to make into a pudding with like half a scoop of protein, some salt, and some bananas or something like that. So a ton of carbs, ton of sodium, and it's digested super, super quickly. I usually prescribe 3 of those during the day, along with another carbohydrate drink similar to the one they drank after weigh-ins. It tends to make people feel great. Their stomach isn't heavy, which is the main thing. You don't want your stomach full. You don't want blood in your digestive tract when you're trying to perform. When it comes to the 2-hour weigh-in, it's a little bit different. Like Mark mentioned, the time of day, also the time that they weigh in. So are they last in the weigh-ins or are they first, right? So depending on that, they could have 2 hours or they could have 90 minutes. And that includes their warm-up time. So that's really going to dictate how you navigate this situation. So I like to give people a lot of options. You'll usually know based on they tend to go alphabetically, but have carbohydrates right away, sodium right away. If they're going to be shorter on time, like say they're at the end of the weigh-in flight, opting for, as Mark mentioned, honey. I personally would stay away from oatmeal, opt for like some cream of rice or baby rice is my secret. So I'll usually go with that. Something to get carbohydrates in quickly, opting for a mix between glucose and fructose so you can get some liver uptake as well. But the key is you want the biggest bang for your buck in terms of carbohydrate and sodium and the least amount of stomach discomfort. The other thing people don't think about And I forget who I was having this conversation with. I actually think it might have been you, Tony. You were talking about like a recomp after a meet, and you're like, "Oh, I couldn't put the weight back on," or something like that. Like, did you ever have a bad recomp?
Not that I couldn't put the weight back on, but that my hands swelled up and I couldn't hold on to the
That was
deadlift
it.
bar.
Okay, so it wasn't you. It was someone else within your circle was talking about like, oh, I couldn't put the weight back on. I drank 3 gallons of water. I was like, 3 gallons of water. Well, if every liter is 4 pounds, you guys can do the math there. That's a lot of pounds of water going through, a lot of kidney flushing. You know, they essentially just flush their electrolytes. So thinking about like a liter of water is going to be, you know, a kilogram. So it's 2.2 pounds. Sorry, not 4 pounds, 2.2. So if you've only lost 5 pounds and you drink 2 liters, you've replaced the weight. So now it's about, you know, eating food, and you don't have to shovel a ton of water in, because you can actually go in the other direction and over dilute yourself, further deplete yourself. So it's a happy balance to be played.
Yeah, great points. I think when it comes to putting the weight back on and stuff like that, you have to think about how much weight they took off. And if you just understand the glycogen water ratio of how that equates to total pounds put back on, you can figure out how many carbohydrates they need, how much water they need to put in. One of the big things that I see with a lot of athletes, so what Paul touched on, is they overconsume water and it flushes out their electrolytes. So the next day they put the weight back on, but they don't have the electrolytes within their body. So everything feels sluggish and feels off. So if you think about it, right, 100 grams of carbs of cooked rice is about 350 grams of weight. So if you cut 8 pounds, right, that's going to be roughly 3,500 grams. So 1,000 grams of carbs would equate to 8 pounds put back on. So that'll kind of let you know how many carbohydrates that person needs, right, within their ability to put things back on. And then as soon as they make weight, I try to think about what can we do to get glycogen as full as possible, because that's typically how people cut weight, is some type of carb manipulation. So understanding that your liver glycogen is going to be depleted first. So having a little bit of fruit after weigh-ins with some high molecular weight carbohydrates is something that can replenish the glycogen in the liver first. And then from there, you can start replenishing the glycogen within the muscles. And you just want to make sure that you dilute the carbohydrates enough to where it's not an unfavorable molecular weight to osmolality in the stomach, so that you don't get bloated. So you want to make sure that you find that ratio of carbohydrates to water so that it's diluted enough so where you don't get bloated. And then after weigh-ins, if you had some fruit within the high molecular weight carb drink, I usually put in a couple tablespoons or teaspoons of baking soda, along with some ibuprofen, any type of NSAID. The NSAIDs help downregulate the function of the kidneys. And if your kidneys are downregulated and function-wise, you're not going to have to pee as much. So that's going to allow you to keep as much of the water in as possible. So those are kind of some of the different things. If you cut a lot of weight and you can get desmopressin, which is a nose spray that they give people who urinate themselves to stop them from urinating. So you can do that as well. You kind of need a prescription for it, but there's websites that can allow you to get it. So, but that's a good one as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of thought process for that, right? Once you understand how many carbohydrates, how much weight they need to put on, you can start planning out how much water, how many carbs they need, and then just trying to downregulate the kidneys so that you don't expel any of that urine or electrolytes that you've put into your system. And just making sure that sodium and potassium are back in the body as well. You can get potassium powder that you can sprinkle on your food along with sodium, and then also thinking about magnesium and calcium being replenished as well. So
I like to consider myself a bit of a student and historian of this stuff. And I learned something new today with the anti-pee spray. And I will, in terms of like,
pretty sure it's banned, Mark.
Yeah, but it's not banned for my history in terms of the things that, 2015 was the year of the lemon, where people were like, lemonine, it'd be a diuretic. You should eat a full lemon before weigh-ins. And I started seeing that crop up, and it's just these things so I'll remember that one.
That's a good point.
2021's the year of the anti-pea spray.
Yeah, there you go. That brings up a good point though too, because I think a lot of people will try things that they normally wouldn't do. So I had a client along the same lines, not lemons, but they started drinking dandelion tea. And I was like, I didn't know at the time. And she had a terrible meat and she weighed in really light. And we didn't do anything outside the norm in terms of her weight cut. She weighed in really light and she couldn't put her weight back on. And I asked her, I'm like, did you deviate from our plan at all? And she's like, no, like I did everything you said. And then I drank some tea at night to try to relax. And I was like, what kind of tea did you drink? She goes, well, dandelion tea, because it would help me pee. And I'm like, you realize dandelion has a really long half-life and you just upregulated your kidney production. And that's why you couldn't put on any weight and you couldn't retain any of your electrolytes. And that's why you had a shitty meat. And she goes, I was just trying to be great. You know, it's like, well, no, it's great. Like you can't be mad at the person for trying to be their best and trying to do their best, but it came from a good spot, but it ended up putting us behind the 8 ball. And I think, you know, educating people on like why we're doing what we're doing, again, coming down to the communication aspect of it. And like, you don't have to pull out dandelion tea if you have to lose 600 grams.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
we'll
No, go ahead, Tony. Sorry.
I was just gonna, if you have something to bring in with this conversation, go for it. But I was just gonna go to the last question.
I was just gonna say, like, if anyone's interested in approaching this for the 2-hour scenario, I did link up that link with the ebook I wrote on 2-hour weight class sports specifically, and my experience and some of the evidence around it. I'd be happy to send you guys that for completely free of charge if you're interested. So maybe just send me an email, or I can link it up to you guys if you want to take a look at it. But of interest.
Yeah, Everett awesome. Talking about standing on your head before weigh-ins, that actually does kind of work.
It does work. It does work.
I missed weight at 2015 nationals. I came right down to the 90-minute cutoff in terms of weighing it, and I was a 74 kilo athlete at the time. And I remember 5 minutes out, I was still 74.15 or something. And I went and peed again and I came back, and I remember the ref being like, you know, like push on your head, like blow all your air out or something. And I was like, man, there's gotta be a better way than this. But I made weight. I just remember you remember these things that people say. It's just, it's crazy.
Stand on the outsides of your feet.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like change the pressure in your feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a question we got in would be, would the ratio between carbs and fats have any effect on body comp given sufficient protein? Caylea, we'll let you start with that one.
Repeat the question for me, Tony.
Yep, it is. Would the ratio between carbs and fats have any effect on body comp given sufficient protein?
No. As long as total calories are accounted for and that doesn't change, then it should not affect them, in my opinion. I don't think so.
Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, I know the evidence suggests as long as that protein's matched and calories are equated for, that there's no real benefit either direction. We're just going to go down to personal preference. The one thing that I like to establish with athletes is, you know, if we are going to go in one direction or the other, be it slightly higher carb, lower fat, or vice versa, that we stick with that long enough. Like I wouldn't tell many of my athletes that like you can just interchange them all the times, outside of the exceptions when we're just introducing some flexibility and stuff. It's like, well, yeah, even though that this is the case, let's still aim for the same macro targets from day to day over longer periods of time, so we can assess really what's working and what you're sticking to and stuff. But on a scientific principle basis, yeah, when those are matched, there's no real benefit in either direction. Be it in my practice, if I can get away with having people have additional carbs versus fat, in most cases, there appears to be anecdotally a performance benefit. But with all else things being equal, no, there's no real superiority.
Paul?
So anecdotally speaking, I would say that those who can eat more carbohydrates in the long term, and when I say long term, I mean like months and years, will tend to have better body composition outcomes. And the reason I would say that is, higher resting insulin levels over time, higher amount of fuel for training to push harder and train harder, because we know carbohydrates do impact training intensity, and then better recovery post training. But in the short term, I would say no. And that, especially if you're dealing with an athlete who, maybe wants to trade off some fats for carbs within a day to go out for a meal with their friends, no issues whatsoever. But again, I don't think the research has been done long enough to prove what I'm trying to come across. The other thing I would say is that it's a consideration of who the athlete is, right? If it's a Gen Pop client, I wouldn't put too much emphasis on ratio of fats to carbs. If it's a power lifter or a strength athlete trying to be as strong as possible and perform to the highest level, I would try to leverage carbohydrates as much as I could.
Yeah, I don't think you'll ever see research that would meet your anecdote, because no one's going to sign up for a year-long nutrition study.
Of course, yeah, for sure.
But I definitely agree with Caylea. Like, as far as if calories and protein are equated, then body composition is going to maintain relatively standard. The only difference would be performance. If the question was based around performance, then that would be a different question, where carbohydrates seem to be a bigger driver of performance. And as long as you're maintaining an adequate supply of fats right around that 20% of total calories, will allow you to not have any deviations from health parameters. But yeah, definitely doesn't really matter. It's just personal preference.
So you guys don't do keto?
No, I like
It's
my
a no.
carbs.
It's a no for me, Doc. No.
Only
Right.
charcuterie, the charcuterie boards post weigh in.
Yes,
was it
it's
a wood plank?
I honestly, I feel as if it might have been, but
Perfect.
maybe it was just picked something up at the grocery store on the way out type scenario. Maybe it wasn't the wood plank, but I remember seeing it and being like, no, like what is going on? But I was in a daze too, so I don't know.
We've all seen like donuts and
Yeah, but I've never seen a
Pound of
legit
candy.
charcuterie board.
Yeah, and I'm not
I'm
like
impressed.
I was kind of like, wow, where did I?
Did you have a napkin tucked into a singlet so you didn't get any jam on it or something?
tuxedo singlet.
Super fancy. All right, so last question here, guys, is let's see. Is it more advantageous performance-wise to fill out a weight class quickly if it is not your goal weight class, as opposed to trying to fill out a weight class at as low a body fat as possible? So Adam, what do you mean by if it is not your goal weight class?
So for example, say your ultimate end goal would be to compete at like 242 or 275, but you are currently a light 220. Performance wise, would it be more advantageous to basically skip 220 and just get through that as fast as possible to break into the 242s, or to slowly fill out 220 and actually have a better body comp at the end and not focus on making that the end goal when you get closer to what you would consider your like goal body weight?
Okay, Paul, what do you have?
I think my answer would be different depending on if you were looking for like the immediate performance benefit, like if the immediate gain on your total versus the long-term progression. For me, slow and steady is always going to be the way to go. Mostly from a health perspective, because if say you're a light 220, that means, let's say you're 210 and you want to get to 242 or 240 as quickly as you can. 30 pounds, a lot of body weight. And to put that on in this short amount of time, you're going to have to take some, pretty serious, not risks to your health, but like you're going to have to eat some shit food. And, I'm just not an advocate of that whatsoever. I think the performance detriment from having shitty blood work and not feeling great from the poor food quality would far outweigh the gains to performance that you potentially could have from the weight gain. I would say up your calories, keep making good food choices, keep training hard, and just let your body adapt slowly over time to those good calories. Anytime you get into shortcuts, I'll check out. I'm not interested.
Yeah. Caylea?
I get this a lot. Actually, I get guys, especially you guys want to get big so fast. Slow down. Don't be in a hurry because 30 pounds in a year is like, it's not going to look great and it's not going to feel great. So let's take it slow. So what do you guys think as far as looking at strength athletes? How much mass are you seeing guys being able to put on naturally?
Throughout like their lifespan?
Yeah, over a year. And
Over a year?
working with a barbell athlete, like typically year to year, how much weight can you see guys put on? Because I know this is going to be a big question because everyone wants to fill out weight classes.
Yeah.
But the idea of filling out a weight class means you're going to put on a lot of mass, like we talked about very, very quickly. And it's just, we want to slow that down. So
Yeah,
You
from a
said
natural,
naturally,
yeah,
Like,
a
Anec-
natural.
organically.
Yeah, like anecdotally, I guess.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I'm asking is that about a year and a half ago or so, my coach was like, "Oh, your knee sleeves are looking kind of loose. Let's gain some weight. Like, try and be 220 by next meet." And I was
Good
like,
metric.
I was like, I'm 198. Like,
Mm,
I'm gonna gain 20 pounds by March.
yeah,
But so I just like got on a really aggressive bulk, and eventually I just got to the point where I was like literally just puking every day. Like, it was bad.
Sick.
So like I kind of knew the answer to my question. I was just curious what you guys thought, because you're the experts. But no, I've kind of come to the conclusion now that I'm not just gonna like force my body to gain weight it doesn't want to gain currently.
yeah. No, it's, I mean, that's smart, Adam. But to answer Kaylee's question, a natural strength athlete, a natural bodybuilding athlete where their only focus is trying to put on as much muscle as possible, maybe 3 to 5 pounds a year, maybe. A natural power lifter where they're going to have undulating periods of lower volume, 2 to 3 pounds if they're
Less.
lucky.
Yeah.
Now, does that necessarily equate to always them being strong? Like with powerlifting, if you just build your leverages up, whether it's fat or muscle, you may be able to improve your strength. But at the end of the day, is it worth it? Probably not, right?
Yeah, if we're talking about PEDs, I would say like how experienced they are with PEDs. I've had clients decide to start using, and I had a client put on 40 pounds in like 6 months, and his
That's
body
not a
composition.
promotion for PD.
No. This is purely anecdotal evidence. Like he put on 40 pounds in I think 6 months, and his body composition improved. But then you have lifters who are more experienced with PED usage, and they don't they revert back to the same rates of gain as a natural athlete might, maybe a little bit higher. I think all things equated, the question comes down to like, if you want to feel the best and perform the best, you're going to want to put the best kinds of fuel into your body. And if the way you gain weight is as quick as possible with poor food choices, you're not going to get better.
Yeah. Mark has to be off in 6 minutes, so we'll let him answer this, and then.
Oh yeah, no. I practically one of the things that I've noticed over time is that something I like to call the O-lineman effect. When someone finishes off their O-line career, they either go in one direction or the other. They drop like 100 pounds and live this whole new lifestyle, or they progressively get heavier and heavier because they never really established good habits to maintain their body weight and type stuff. I find that people that are in this scenario, just the race to the end, you can find yourself in that situation where you gain so much weight and don't establish habits that it's really tough to work out of some of those potential negative health effects. So like from a long-term standpoint, if we're thinking that way, like it's just never the way to go. It's like even outside of performance, this is your health and your life. Like this stuff is tough to overcome. And this is coming from someone that like, I do take athletics seriously. It's one of those things where we want to maximize our performance, but we got to think of the big picture too.
Yeah, perfect. So before you get off, Mark, tell everyone where they can follow you, and if they want to do some coaching with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, totally. I'm probably most active on my Instagram. So MARCW Morris, go check that out. And that offer stands. If anyone's interested in that ebook, send me an email, or I can pass it along to you guys, and I'll just pass along the file if you guys want to check it out. But I really appreciate the getting involved. This is great.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you betcha.
So kind of to elaborate on the question, you can drop off whenever you want, Mark. Appreciate your time, man. Yeah, if the idea of gaining a bunch of weight sounds good in theory, but it's really going to affect your performance, right? You'll see this with a lot of the bigger guys. They're not able to perform a lot of their movements at a volume necessary for them to grow because they have constant lower back pumps. Their training is deteriorating because they have a huge inability for them to actually complete the training because they're in such a shitty spot, right? And if you add on a bunch of weight, your blood pressure is going to go up, your sleep's going to be disturbed. So there's no physiological reason that'll improve your performance over time. It just doesn't make sense to me, right? And then you're just going to get overly fat, and that's going to cause you to want to diet down again. So then you're just going to be going back and forth on this overconsumption of food and then drastic diet to get it all off, which I see time and time again with lifters. Now, I say you want to be at 242, 275. I have known people to eat their way up to that weight class no matter what, get there, and then just sit there for years and years and years and kind of deal with that like bit of suffering and issues, right? My training partner from when I lived in Oregon, Sean Doyle, he has a 2,400 pound total. He got up to 308 and he just sat there his entire career pretty much for 10 years. And he just, once he added in PDs and everything else, his body just recomped. And so there's that to think about as well. But from like a health perspective and a performance perspective, that first year of pushing a lot of weight is not going to be your best year of training for numerous reasons. If you are going to push weight at a drastic tick, I would definitely add in some type of cardio that is weight bearing so that your body just naturally like adjust with the weight going up as well. That's kind of the things that I think about, right? I know a lot of people say the leaner you are, the easier it is to put on muscle. There's been a debate over that recently that you can put on muscle at any fat point you're at. You don't have to be lean to put it on better. So if you look at like, if you're interested in that, just look up P ratios for muscle gain, and it'll kind of show that the most muscular people also usually have a tendency to have the most fat on them as well. Sumo wrestlers are one, offensive linemen are the other. So there's pros and cons to it. If you're on PEDs, you can push the rate of weight gain a little bit faster. If you're a natural athlete, it's not really that important to rush. I would say for 99% of people, it's not that important to rush. That 1%, you can probably do it structurally. Like if you're 6'3" and you're 200 pounds and you're just sticks and bones, then it might be good to put on weight. If you don't get fat really easy and you can put on weight really fast and not get fat, and you can do it like with good food and you perform well, then yeah, do that. I always think about what performance is the driver of everything if you're a performance athlete. So if you're able to perform at a high level and you're getting stronger at whatever weight gain you're going, just continue that rate of gain at that level, because that's going to be your biggest driver. Any follow-up? What do you have, Adam?
I'm just going to say thank you. That is way more of an answer than I was expecting. Thank you. That's profound.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you all four of you.
Any follow-ups? No? All right. That's all the questions we have, guys. Thank you so much for jumping on and participating in this. Thank you, Caylea. If people want to follow you, Caylea, or get coaching from you, where can they do that?
It's Miss K on Instagram, and then my website is Kiss Nutrition.
Awesome. And then I'm sure you guys know Paul, but Paul, go ahead and leave your stuff as well.
Yeah, so I'm at Paul O'Need on Instagram or at Master Athletic Performance. My website's masterathletic.com. I think this would be a good time to pump Coach's Corner U. These are the types of conversations that we're having on a regular basis at CCU. We're going to be doing these webinars more often. And we also have our weekly podcast as well. So please check out Coach's Corner U. We've got a free 14-day trial up right now. So you guys can check out the content that we're putting out on a regular basis and learn more about the stuff that we're trying to educate people on.
All right, guys. Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Again, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to jump on the calls. We really appreciate it.